Elias Thorne stood in the center of the cathedral, his hand gripping the cold steel of a fire axe. The funeral for his wife, Zora, had just reached its final blessing. But the billionaire wasn't mourning. He was trembling with a fury that froze the room. "Stop the burial," Elias roared, his voice cracking the solemn silence. Before the guards could move, the blade of the axe bit deep into the mahogany lid. The sound of splintering wood echoed like a gunshot. His best friend, Caleb, lunged forward, shouting about madness and respect for the dead. But Elias didn't flinch. He saw the truth in the strain. Industrial smell wafting from the cracks, not the scent of lilies, but of cold chemicals and lies. With a final, desperate heave, the lid flew open. The gasps from the crowd turned into a terrifying silence. There was no Zora, no elegant lace, no peaceful face. Instead, the casket was filled with heavy iron weights and a tattered, blood-stained dress that Zora hadn't worn in years. Why would someone go to such lengths to bury a lie? If Zora wasn't in this box, then whose life had Elias been mourning for the last 3 days? And more importantly, where was his wife? Elias stared at his phone as a single notification flickered, tracking signal found. 20 miles away. The heavy iron weights inside the casket groaned as Elias pushed the lid aside. The silence in the cathedral was no longer respectful. It was paralyzed. Caleb took a sharp step back, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Elias didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the cameras. His eyes were locked on the tattered, blood-stained dress lying atop the metal blocks. It was a simple, yellow, sunburst dress. Zora had worn it on the night they first met, years before the Billions and the Thorne Empire. But there was something wrong. The fabric wasn't just old, it was freshly soaked in a dark, metallic-smelling crimson. Elias reached out, his fingers trembling as he brushed the hem. His heart skipped a beat. Tucked into a small, hidden pocket Zora always sewed into her clothes, he felt something hard. He pulled it out. It was a silver locket, but not Zora's. It belonged to his mother, a piece of jewelry that had been buried with her 10 years ago in the family vault. Elias, step away from there. Caleb's voice was no longer comforting. It was frantic, almost desperate. He signaled the security team, and 4 large men began to close in. Elias ignored them. He looked at the locket. It was slightly ajar. Inside, there wasn't a photo. There was a tiny, folded piece of parchment with a single sentence written in Zora's elegant, unmistakable handwriting. The basement has eyes, and the shadows have ears. Don't trust the one who carries the key. Elias felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. He looked up at Caleb. His best friend's hand was instinctively reaching for his pocket, gripping a heavy brass key ring. Just then, his phone vibrated again in his palm. The tracking signal on the screen didn't just stay at the 20-mile mark. It started moving fast. It was heading straight toward the Thorne family estate. Elias realized with a jolt of terror that the accident wasn't the end of the plan. It was just the distraction. If Zora was alive and moving, she wasn't escaping. Someone was taking her back to the one place Elias thought was safe. He backed away from the altar, the axe still in his hand. He caught the eye of his stepmother Martha, sitting in the front row. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the silver locket in his hand with a look of pure, calculated hunger. Elias didn't wait for the guards to reach him. He turned and bolted toward the side exit, his mind racing. Why was his mother's locket in a fake casket? And why was his wife's signal moving toward a house that was supposed to be empty? As he slammed his car into gear, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The driver didn't move, but the sunlight caught the glint of a camera lens pointed directly at him. Someone wasn't just watching the funeral. They were waiting for him to find the first piece of the puzzle. The tires of Elias' heavy SUV screamed against the pavement as he tore away from the cathedral. Behind him, the black SUV didn't follow. It stayed parked, cold and watching. Elias gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked down at the silver locket resting in the cup holder. This wasn't just about a missing wife anymore. This was a haunting from the grave. He diverted from the main highway, heading toward the old industrial district, the place where the Thorne family wealth began, but also where the poorest families in the city struggled to survive. He needed to meet his old gardener Moses. Moses was the only person who had worked for Elia's mother before she died. Elias pulled up to a crumbling brick house. It stood in the shadow of his own massive corporate skyscrapers. The contrast was sickening. On one side of the river, Elias owned glass towers. On this side, Moses lived in a room with a laking ceiling. Moses was sitting on the porch, his dark, weathered face showing no surprise at the billionaire's arrival. Elias didn't offer a handshake. He held up the locket. "Someone put this in Zora's casket, Moses. It was supposed to be with my mother. In the vault." Moses stood up slowly, his knees popping. He walked over and peered at the jewelry. He didn't look shocked. He looked terrified. "Mr. Elias," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Your mother didn't go to her grave with that locket. She gave it away 2 nights before she passed." Elias froze. "To who?" "To the woman who was cleaning the floors," Moses said, pointing toward the Thorne estate on the hill. "The woman everyone ignored. Your stepmother's sister." Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. If the locket was a gift, why was it hidden in a fake casket with a blood-stained dress? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from inside Moses's small house. Moses gasped and scrambled toward the door, but a man in a dark uniform stepped out first. It was one of Caleb's private security guards. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding an old, dusty ledger, the payroll records from 20 years ago. "Mr. Thorne," the guard said, his voice cold and professional. "Caleb suggested you might come here. He wanted me to tell you that some debts are too old to be paid in cash." The guard tossed the ledger into a burning trash barrel in the yard. Elias lunged for it, but the flames took the paper instantly. As the pages curled into ash, Elias caught a glimpse of one name highlighted in red ink, Zora asterisk. But the date was wrong. The date on the payroll was 15 years before Elias had even met her. Elias looked at Moses, but the old man was already backing away, his eyes fixed on the hill. "They aren't taking her home, Mr. Elias," Moses choked out. "They're taking her to the place where the shadows began." Elias' phone chimed. The signal had stopped. It wasn't at the main mansion. It was at the old, abandoned textile mill at the edge of the Thorne property. As Elias ran back to his car, he realized Caleb hadn't just been his lawyer. Caleb had been a gatekeeper. But what was the secret that linked a billionaire's mother, a cleaning lady's, and a woman who didn't exist 15 years ago? Elias looked back at the burning barrel. A single scrap of paper hadn't burned yet. He snatched it from the heat. It wasn't a name. It was a floor plan of his own house, with a room marked in the basement that he had never seen in his entire life. Elias stared at the charred floor plan in his hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. The textile mill was a skeletal ruin of rusted steel and broken glass, silhouetted against the dying sun. He slammed his SUV into park and didn't bother locking the door. The tracking signal had vanished exactly at this coordinate. He stepped inside the mill. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something sweet like the perfume Zora used to wear. He followed a faint flickering light coming from the far end of the warehouse. His boots crunched on shattered glass, the sound echoing like bone breaking in the hollow space. "Zora," he shouted. His voice was swallowed by the shadows. He reached a small, makeshift room partitioned by heavy plastic sheets. He ripped them aside. His breath stopped. The room was filled with dozens of monitors, all showing live feeds from inside his own mansion, the kitchen, his study, the hallways. But the center screen was different. It showed the room from the floor plan, the hidden basement room. On the screen, a woman was sitting in a chair with her back to the camera. She was wearing a yellow sunburst dress, the exact same one he had found in the casket. Zora, Elias whispered, stepping toward the screen. The woman on the monitor slowly turned around. Elias staggered back, his knees hitting the cold floor. It wasn't Zora. It was a woman who looked exactly like his mother, 30 years younger. She had the same eyes, the same jawline, and the same silver locket around her neck. She looked directly into the camera lens as if she could see Elias standing in the ruins of the mill. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the shadows on the screen and touched the woman's shoulder. It was a man's hand, wearing a Thorne family signet ring, the one Elias' father was supposed to have been buried with. Elias' phone buzzed in his pocket. A text message from an unknown number appeared. The funeral was for the secret, not the wife's. A heavy metallic clang rang out behind him. Elias spun around. The massive steel doors of the textile mill were sliding shut, locking him inside. From the darkness above, a familiar voice drifted down through the rafters. "You were always too curious for your own good, Elias," the voice said. It was Caleb, but he sounded different, cold, victorious. "Did you really think your family started with a clean slate?" Elias lunged for the door, but a sharp hiss filled the air. A thick, white mist began pouring from the vents in the ceiling. His vision blurred instantly. As he collapsed, he saw one last thing on the monitor. The woman who looked like his mother stood up. She walked to the camera and pressed a blood-stained thumb against the lens. Below the screen, a small printer began to hum, spitting out a single photograph. It was a picture of Elias as a baby, held by the cleaning lady Moses had mentioned. On the back of the photo, written in fresh red ink, were the words, "Welcome home." Little brother Elias clawed at his throat, gasping as the thick white mist filled his lungs. His world spun. The image of the woman on the monitor, the ghost of his mother, was the last thing he saw before darkness took him. He woke up with a jolt. His head throbbed. His wrists were raw, chafed by heavy zip ties that bound him to a cold, metal chair. He wasn't in the textile mill anymore. The air was stagnant and smelled of old stone and expensive cigar smoke. Elias struggled, his boots kicking against the floor. "Caleb, you coward. Show yourself." His shout echoed, but not in a large warehouse. The sound hit the walls and bounced back instantly. He looked around, his eyes straining in the dim light. He was in a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with wine racks, but they were empty, covered in decades of dust. This was the hidden basement room from the floor plan. He was inside his own house. "It's no use screaming, Elias," a voice whispered. Elias froze. The voice didn't come from a speaker. It came from the shadows behind him. A figure stepped into the light. It was Caleb. He was holding a glass of amber liquid in one hand and that heavy brass key ring in the other. "You're a traitor," Elias spat, his voice trembling with rage. "Where is Zora? If you hurt her, I'll burn this empire to the ground." Caleb let out a short, dry laugh. He walked over to a wooden table and picked up a small, weathered leather box. "You still think this is about Zora? You still think you're the hero of this story?" Caleb flipped the box open. Inside sat a stack of birth certificates, all with the Thorne family seal. Caleb pulled one out and held it inches from Elias' face. Elias squinted. The name on the paper wasn't his. It wasn't his father's. It was the name of the cleaning lady's son. The date of birth was exactly the same as Elias. "My father died 10 years ago," Elias growled. "He was buried with that ring. How do you have it?" "Was he?" Caleb smiled, lining in clothes. "Or was the casket we buried 10 years ago just like the one you opened today? Full of stones and lies?" Suddenly, a rhythmic thumping started above their heads. Thump, thump. Thump, it sounded like someone pacing frantically in the hallway, directly above the hidden room. Elias' heart leaped. "Zora. Is that her?" Caleb's smile vanished. He looked up at the ceiling, his face turning pale. He gripped his keys so hard, his knuckles turned white. "She's not supposed to be able to move yet." he muttered to himself. Caleb turned and raced toward the heavy steel door of the basement, fumbling with the brass keys. He slammed the door shut, locking Elias inside the darkness. Elias sat in the silence, listening to the footsteps above, but then he heard something else, a faint, metallic scratching coming from inside the wine racks behind him. A small brick dislodged and hit the floor. Through the gap, Elias saw a pair of wide, terrified eyes looking back at him. Elias, a voice whispered. It was Zora. But her voice wasn't coming from the floor above. It was coming from deeper inside the wall. Zora. I'm here. Elias lunged forward, nearly tipping the chair over. Get out of there. I can't, she sobbed. Elias, look at the floor. Under the table. You have to see what they've been hiding for 30 years. Elias strained his neck, looking down into the shadows beneath the heavy oak table. His breath hitched. Resting there was a second silver locket, identical to the one his mother wore, but this one was gripped in the skeletal fingers of a hand reaching out from beneath the floorboards. Elias stared at the skeletal remains beneath the table, the silver locket glinting like a cold eye in the dark. He opened his mouth to scream, but the heavy thumping above intensified. It wasn't just pacing anymore. It was the sound of dozens of boots. Doors were being kicked open. Voices were shouting. Elias Thorne, we knowed you're in there. The voice boomed through the vents. It was the police commissioner, a man Elias had donated millions to. But he didn't sound like a friend. He sounded like a hunter. Above, the basement door creaked open. Elias froze as a flood of light spilled down the stairs. It wasn't just the police. Behind the officers stood his stepmother Martha, surrounded by a swarm of news reporters. The flashbulbs of their cameras went off like silent explosions, capturing Elias tied to the chair, disheveled and surrounded by empty wine racks. Look at him, Martha wailed, her voice loud enough for every microphone to catch. He's lost his mind. He desecrated Zora's funeral, and now he's hiding in the cellar like a common criminal. The reporters scrambled, pushing past the police tape. They weren't looking for the truths. They were looking for the fall of a titan. Mr. Thorne, did you kill your wife? One shouted. Is it true you're being replaced as CIO? Elias struggled against the zip ties, his eyes darting toward the wine rack where Zora was hidden behind the wall. Zora is here, he yelled. She's alive. Look behind the racks. The lead officer looked at the wine racks and then back at Martha. Martha didn't flinch. She stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at the oak table Elias had been staring at. Officer, please, she sobbed. My poor husband. Elias' father. He always told me Elias had a dark streak. He couldn't handle the pressure of the Thorne legacy. Caleb stepped out from the crowd of officers, looking calm and professional. He handed a document to the commissioner. This is a court-ordered emergency, psychiatric hold, Caleb said smoothly. Elias Thorne is a danger to himself and the reputation of this city. As the officers moved in to grab his chair, Elias kicked the table with all his might. The table slid back, exposing the skeletal hand and the floorboards. Look, he screamed. There is a body under my floor. My mother gave that locket away. Ask Caleb whose hand that is. The commissioner looked down. He saw the bone. He saw the silver. For a second, the room went dead silent. Martha's face turned as white as a sheet, but only for a heartbeat. She turned to the cameras and let out a blood-curdling shriek. He did it. He dug up his own mother's remains. He's trying to frame us to cover his own sins. The crowd erupted. The police tackled Elias, pinning his face to the cold stone floor. Through the chaos, Elias saw Caleb lean down. Caleb didn't look worried. He reached out and snatched the locket from the skeletal fingers, slipping it into his pocket before anyone else could see it. You're done, Elias, Caleb whispered into his ear over the noise of the shouting reporters. By tomorrow, the world will think you're a monster, and Zora. She's already being moved to a place where no one can hear her scratch. As they dragged Elias toward the stairs, he caught a glimpse of Zora's eyes through the hole in the brick one last time. She wasn't crying anymore. She was pointing at the bottom of the commissioner's boot. Stuck to the heel of the officer's shoe was a small, bright yellow scrap of fabric. The same fabric from the sunburst dress. Elias realized the commissioner wasn't there to rescue him. He was there to make sure the evidence disappeared. But as they pulled him out of the room, Elias noticed something Martha had missed. The second locket Caleb had grabbed. It wasn't a locket at all. It was a digital recording device shaped like jewelry, and the red light was still blinking. The sirens wailed outside as Elias was shoved into the back of a blacked-out police van. His wrists were now in cold steel cuffs, replacing the plastic ties. He pressed his face against the small, grated window, watching his own mansion shrink in the distance. He didn't see Martha or the reporters anymore. He only saw Caleb standing on the porch, holding that small digital recording device he had snatched from the skeleton's hand. Elias slumped against the hard plastic seat, his mind spinning with a toxic realization. The yellow scrap on the commissioner's boot. The skeleton under the floorboards. The woman in the textile mill who looked exactly like his mother. She was in on it. Elias whispered to the empty, dark interior of the van. He remembered Zora's eyes behind the wine rack. She hadn't been screaming for help at the end. She had been pointing, but not at a way out. She was pointing at the evidence Caleb was about to steal. Elias' heart turned to light as a new, darker thought took root. Zora was an architect. She knew every inch of that house. She knew about the hidden basement room long before he did. She didn't disappear. He growled, his grief curdling into a sharp, jagged resentment. She planned this. He recalled the silver locket Zora had left in the fake casket. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a breadcrumb leading him directly into this trap. She knew he would stop the funeral. She knew he would find the hidden floor plan. She had used his love for her to lead him to a place where Caleb and Martha could finally destroy him in front of the world. The van slowed down, but it didn't pull into the police station. It turned into a private medical facility shielded by high concrete walls and barbed wire. The doors swung open. Caleb was already there waiting. He looked disappointed, like a father dealing with a disobedient child. He held up a thick manila folder. Zora wanted you to have this, Elias, Caleb said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. He pulled out a document. It was a life insurance policy Zora had signed only 2 weeks ago. The beneficiary wasn't Elias. It was a shell company owned by the same cleaning lady from the payroll records. She didn't just leave you, Elias, Caleb whispered as the orderlies grabbed Elias' arms. She sold you. She's been working with Martha since the day you got married. That skeleton under the floor. That's the real reason she married you. To find it. Elias felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred. He didn't fight the orderlies this time. He let them drag him toward the heavy white doors. But as Caleb turned to walk away, Elias noticed a small, rhythmic tapping coming from Caleb's suit pocket. It was the recording device. It wasn't just recording. It was broadcasting. A muffled, distorted voice came from Caleb's pocket, tiny but clear in the quiet night air. It wasn't Zora's voice. It was a voice Elias hadn't heard in 10 years, his mother's voice, and she was saying something that made Elias' blood run cold. Caleb, is the boy secure? He must never know what we did to his real father. Elias stopped dead. He looked at Caleb, then at the locket recorder. If Zora had betrayed him, why was she carrying a recording of his dead mother plotting against him? And who was the boy they were talking about? The orderly pushed Elias toward the intake desk, but Elias dug his heels into the linoleum floor. His eyes were burning with a fire Caleb had never seen before. The voice on that recording was a poison, seeping into his mind and twisting his memory of Zora into something ugly and unrecognizable. You and Zora deserve each other, Elias screamed. his voice raw. She's not a victim. She's the predator. Caleb paused, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. He pulled out a small burner phone and pressed a button. He held it up so Elias could see the screen. It was a live video feed of Zora. She was sitting in a sterile white room, her hands folded in her lap, looking calmly at the camera. She wasn't bound. She wasn't crying. "Tell him, Zora," Caleb commanded into the phone. Zora looked into the lens. Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth Elias had cherished for years. "Elias, stop fighting. It was always about the locket. It was never about us. I only stayed until I found where your mother hid the truth." The words hit Elias like a physical blow to the chest. The woman he had loved, the woman he had almost died for, had just admitted to a 3-year lie. The rage inside him boiled over. He lunged at the phone, nearly dragging the orderlies to the floor. "I curse the day I met you," Elias roared at the screen. "You want the Thorne legacy, take it. Take the blood and the skeletons and the lies. I hope it burns you both alive." He turned to Caleb, his face inches from the traitors. "Tell her I'm signing everything over, every cent, every brick. I want nothing to do with her or the Thorne name ever again. Tell her she's dead to me, more dead than the body in that casket." Caleb nodded to the orderlies. They began to drag Elias toward the heavy padded doors of the isolation wing. Elias didn't look back. He didn't see the tiny, frantic flicker in Zora's eyes on the screen, or the way her hands were trembling beneath the table. As the heavy steel door slammed shut and the bolt turned, locking Elias in white-walled silence, he slumped against the padding. He had given up. He had handed the keys of his kingdom to his enemies, fueled by a hatred he couldn't control. But then, he felt something sharp in the lining of his suit jacket. He reached inside a small tear in the fabric. His fingers pulled out a tiny silver key. It wasn't a key to a door. It was a key to a safe deposit box. And taped to the key was a microscopic photo. Elias squinted at the image. It wasn't a photo of his mother or his father. It was a photo of Caleb as a young boy, standing next to the cleaning lady in front of the Thorne mansion. But Caleb wasn't holding her hand. He was wearing a small, gold signet ring, the exact same ring Elias' father was supposed to be wearing. Elias realized with a sickening jolt that he had just signed his life away to the wrong person. The voice on the recording hadn't been talking about him. It had been talking about Caleb. But if Caleb was the boy from the recording, then who was the man currently pacing outside the isolation door? And why did the photo show a second child hiding in the shadows of the mansion's doorway, a child who looked exactly like Elias? The silver key slipped from Elias' fingers, clattering onto the cold, white floor. He stared at the microscopic photo. The truth was a jagged blade, and it had just finished cutting his world into pieces. He wasn't the billionaire heir. He was the child in the shadows. He was the son of a cleaning lady, while Caleb, the man now wearing his father's ring, was the real Thorne. A heavy television mounted high on the wall suddenly flickered to life. It was a live news broadcast. Elias' own face stared back at him, but the headline beneath it was a death sentence. Elias Thorne declared mentally unfit. Thorne Empire transferred to sister-in-law Martha and legal counsel Caleb Vance. Elias watched in frozen silence as the news showed Martha standing on the steps of his mansion. She was holding a stack of papers, the papers he had just signed in a fit of rage. She looked at the cameras, her eyes dry and cold. Elias has been suffering in secret for a long time. Martha lied to the world. Zora tried to help him, but after what happened at the funeral, she couldn't stay. She has left the country for her own safety. Elias lunged for the TV, his cuffs snapping against the metal frame of the bed. She's lying. Zora is still in the house. But no one heard him. He was a ghost in a padded room. His stocks were being sold. His accounts were frozen. His name was being erased from the very buildings he had built. He had no money, no wife, and no identity. He was lower than the homeless man he had ignored a week ago. Suddenly, the small observation window on the door slid open. It wasn't a doctor. It was the police commissioner. He looked at Elias with a mixture of pity and disgust. He reached through the slot and dropped a small, clear plastic bag onto the floor. Inside the bag was a single item, a piece of yellow fabric from Zora's dress. But this piece wasn't stained with blood. It was stained with black ink, and it had a series of numbers written on it. Caleb paid me to make sure you never left this room, the commissioner whispered, glancing nervously down the hall. But I knew your father Elias, not the man in the Thorne portraits. I knew the man who worked the docks with my own father. Elias stopped breathing. What are you talking about? The commissioner leaned closer, his voice barely a breath. The man under your floorboards wasn't your father. He was a dock worker who disappeared 30 years ago, the same day your mother allegedly gave away that locket. The commissioner turned to leave, but Elias shouted through the door. Then who is buried in my father's grave? And why did Zora write these numbers on her dress? The commissioner didn't answer. He simply tapped his watch and walked away. Elias grabbed the scrap of fabric. The numbers weren't a phone number. They were a time and a date. Today's date. In exactly 10 minutes. A muffled explosion rocked the building. The lights in the isolation wing flickered and died. A thick, red emergency light began to pulse. Through the silence, a new sound emerged. Not a thumping, not a shout. It was the sound of a woman's humming, a lullaby his mother used to sing, drifting through the ventilation shaft from a room even deeper than his own. And then, the door to his cell didn't just unlock. It swung wide open, revealing a person standing in the hallway that Elias never thought he would see again. The smoke cleared slowly in the dim red glow of the emergency lights. Standing in the doorway wasn't a guard or a ghost. It was Moses, the old gardener. His weathered face was covered in soot, and he was holding a heavy master key. Mr. Elias, we don't have much time, Moses whispered, his voice urgent. Elias stood up, his mind reeling. Moses, how did you get in here? And the explosion. The commissioner didn't just give you a note, Elias. He gave us the signal, Moses said, quickly unlocking the steel cuffs. He's lived with the guilt of what happened 30 years ago for long enough. As they hurried down the dark, vibrating hallway, Elias gripped the scrap of yellow fabric. Zora. The numbers on this cloth. She knew this was going to happen. Moses stopped at a heavy service elevator. He turned to Elias, his eyes filled with a painful clarity. Zora didn't betray you, Elias. She found the truth in the archives months ago. She knew Caleb and Martha were planning to replace you with the real heir. She knew they were going to kill you the moment you signed those papers. Then why did she say those things on the video? Elias demanded. She told me it was all a lie. Because they were holding a gun to her head, just inches from the camera. Moses snapped. She sacrificed her reputation to keep you alive long enough for this moment. The elevator door hissed open, but they didn't go up. They went down, into the sub-basement of the facility. Moses led him to a small, refrigerated room marked *records*. Inside, resting on a steel table, was the second silver locket, the one Caleb had snatched from the skeleton. Caleb thought he stole the recorder, Moses said, picking up the jewelry. But he stole a decoy. Zora swapped them when the police tackled you. Moses pressed a hidden button on the side of the locket. A holographic projection flickered to life in the cold room. It was a video from 30 years ago, filmed inside the Thorne mansion. Elias watched frozen. He saw his father, the billionaire, standing next to a man who looked exactly like the dock worker the commissioner had mentioned. They were laughing. They were brothers, twins. The video shifted to a dark argument. Martha and Caleb's mother, the cleaning lady, were standing over a body. It wasn't the dock worker. It was the billionaire. The secret isn't that you aren't a Thorne, Elias, Moses whispered as the video continued. The secret is that Caleb isn't one either. The cleaning lady's son died as a baby. She and Martha stole a child from the docks to act as the backup heir in case you ever found out the truth. Elias felt the world tilt. Then to eyes. If Caleb isn't the son, and the billionaire was murdered. The video zoomed in on the cleaning lady's face. She was holding two infants. One was Caleb. The other was Elias. You were never the son of the cleaning lady, Moses said, his voice trembling. You were the billionaire's only child. Caleb was the dock worker's son. They swapped you at birth to ensure they could control the fortune through a child they could manipulate. Elias stared at the screen. The woman he thought was his mother was actually the woman who had stolen his life. Suddenly, the elevator hummed. Someone was coming down. Elias looked at the locket, then at the numbers on Zora's dress. The time was exactly 10:00 p.m. The locket didn't stop at the video. It began to emit a high-pitched frequency on the wall. A hidden compartment clicked open, revealing a dusty, blood-stained will, the original one, signed before his father was murdered. Elias snatched the paper, but his blood ran cold when he read the final clause. The will didn't leave the money to Elias or Caleb. It left everything to a third party, a person whose name made the entire conspiracy look like child's play. Moses, Elias gasped, pointing at the name. If this person is the owner, then Zora isn't just a victim. She's the only one who can sign the order to end us all. The elevator doors opened. Caleb stepped out, but he wasn't alone. He was holding Zora by the arm, and he had a flare gun pointed directly at the oxygen tanks in the corner. The truth is a heavy burden, isn't it? Elias, Caleb sneered. Now, tell me, did you find the name on the will? Because Zora just told me something that changes everything. Elias stared at Zora, and for the first time, he saw past the cold mask she had been forced to wear. Her eyes were red, her bottom lip bruised, and her hands were raw from where the zip ties had dug into her skin. The weight of his own words, the curses he had hurled at her in the isolation wing, crashed down on him like a mountain of lead. Zora, Elias choked out, his voice cracking. I thought you sold me out. I told them you were dead to me. Zora didn't look away. A single tear tracked through the dust on her cheek. She didn't say a word, but she leaned slightly toward him, despite the flare gun Caleb pressed against her temple. Caleb laughed a jagged, ugly sound. Heartbreaking. But an apology won't change the name on that will. Elias, who is it? Who did your father leave the Thorne Empire to? Elias looked down at the blood-stained document. He didn't answer Caleb. Instead, he stepped forward, ignoring the threat of the flare gun. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver key he had found in his suit lining. I don't care about the money anymore, Caleb, Elias said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. I don't care about the name. I care about the 3 years this woman spent protecting a man who was too blind to see it. Elias threw the original will toward Caleb. It fluttered through the air like a wounded bird. Caleb reached for it, his greed momentarily distracting him. In that split second, Elias didn't run for the exit. He lunged toward the master control panel on the refrigerated wall. He jammed the silver key into a slot marked * internal ventilation *. You think you won because you have the papers, Elias growled. You forgot one thing, Caleb. You spent 20 years learning how to be a Thorne. I spent 20 years building the systems that run this city. With a sharp twist of the key, the high-pitched frequency from the locket surged. The heavy steel shutters of the record room didn't just close, they sealed. But they didn't seal Elias and Moses inside. They sealed Caleb in the corridor. Zora tripped forward as Caleb let go of her to grab the will. Elias caught her, pulling her through the closing gap of the heavy door. He held her against his chest, his tears finally falling into her hair. I'm sorry, he whispered into her ear. I'm so sorry, Zora. I'll never let go again. Caleb slammed his fists against the reinforced glass of the door. screaming as he clutched the will. He began to read the final clause out loud, his face twisting in confusion. This is impossible, Caleb shrieked. The third party. It's not a person. It's a foundation. Zora pulled back from Elias, her breath hitching. She looked at the monitor Moses was still holding. Elias, it's not just a foundation. She whispered. Look at the registration date. It was founded 40 years ago, 10 years before you were even born. Elias looked at the document in Caleb's hand through the glass. The third party was the asterisk Lily Thorne Trust asterisk. I don't have a sister named Lily, Elias muttered. No, Zora said, pointing to the photo Moses had shown earlier, the one of the cleaning lady holding 2 babies. But the cleaning lady did. She had a daughter who died in the same accident as the billionaire. Suddenly, the locket in Moses's hand began to glow blue. A new file opened on the screen. It was a DNA sequence comparison. Elias felt his heart stop. The DNA of the cleaning lady didn't match Caleb. And it didn't match Elias. It matched the skeletal remains found under the floorboards. If the cleaning lady was the one under the floor, then who had been playing the role of Martha for the last 30 years? And why was the signal on Elias' phone now showing that Martha was standing directly behind them inside the sealed room? Elias spun around, shielding Zora with his body. The shadow in the corner of the room moved, and the woman everyone called Martha stepped into the cold light. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't frail. She held a heavy black detonator in her hand, her eyes fixed on the record room's reinforced doors. You were always the smart one, Elias, she said, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. But smart sons know when to stop digging. Elias didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for mercy. He lunged for the server rack containing the original digital backups of the Thorne estate. Moses. Get Zora to the ventilation shaft, now. Moses grabbed Zora's arm, pulling her toward the narrow crawl space. But Zora resisted. She snatched a heavy bronze paperweight from the desk and threw it with all her might at the main monitor. The glass shattered, but the internal drive remained intact. I'm not leaving you again. Elias, Zora screamed over the rising hum of the facility's emergency sirens. Martha pressed a button on the detonator. A series of heavy iron bolts slammed into place, locking the ventilation shaft. They were trapped. The Lily Thorne Trust isn't a charity, Elias. Martha mocked, stepping closer. It's a grave, and today, you finally join your father in it. Elias ignored the threat. He ripped the hard drive from the rack, the cables sparking against his palms. He ran toward the room's only window, a thick, triple-paned glass overlooking the facility's main atrium, where the reporters were still gathered. He didn't try to break the glass. Instead, he slammed the silver locket against the wireless transmitter on the wall. If the world thinks I'm crazy, let them see the evidence live. Outside, in the atrium, the giant jumbotron screens suddenly flickered. The image of the murdered billionaire appeared, followed by the DNA results. The reporters below gasped, their cameras turning upward toward the record room window. Martha's face twisted in rage. She raised the detonator high. You think a broadcast saves you? This entire wing is rigged with enough thermite to erase every bone in this room. Elias stood his ground, gripping Zora's hand. He saw Caleb through the glass door, frantically trying to blast his way in with the flare gun. The facility was becoming a furnace. The broadcast is just the distraction, Martha, Elias said, his voice calm. I didn't just send the video. I sent the command to unlock the family vault at the cemetery. Martha froze. The detonator in her hand trembled. The police are there right now, Elias continued, stepping toward her. They aren't finding my father's body. They're finding the logs of every payment you made to the commissioner over the last 30 years. Hidden in the one place you never thought I'd look, inside the real Lily Thorne's casket. The building shuddered as a massive explosion rocked the floor below. Martha looked at the detonator, then at the window. She realized she had lost the narrative, but she still had the fire. She lunged for Elias, but Zora tripped her, sending the detonator skidding across the floor toward the open elevator shaft. Elias grabbed the drive and pulled Zora toward the emergency exit, but a familiar, heavy metallic clicking sound stopped them. It wasn't the detonator. It was the sound of the master server room locking them into a countdown. On the wall, a digital clock appeared, 60 seconds. But it wasn't a countdown to an explosion. It was a countdown to a complete data wipe of the Thorne Empire's global accounts. Elias, stop it, Caleb screamed from behind the glass. If you wipe the accounts, we all lose everything. The billions, the legacy, all of it. Elias looked at the screen, then at Zora. He held the silver key over the abort button. He had the power to save the money, or he could let it all burn to ensure Martha and Caleb had nothing left to fight for. Zora looked at him, her eyes searching his. Do it, Elias. End the curse. Elias' finger hovered over the button, but then a voice came through the room's intercom, a voice that sounded like a younger version of the woman standing in front of them. Elias, don't press it, the voice whispered. There's a third child. One you haven't found yet. The timer hit 0. Elias pressed the button, but he didn't hit abort, he hit execute. A heavy silence fell over the room as billions of dollars vanished into a global charity fund for the docks, returning the wealth to the very people his father's killers had exploited. Outside the glass, Caleb fell to his knees, his face pressed against the transparent barrier. He watched the digital numbers on the monitors turn to nothing. He was no longer a Thorne. He was no longer a lawyer. He was just a man with a flare gun and an empty soul. Police sirens drowned out the dying hum of the servers. The record room doors hissed open as the commissioner, his face pale and hands shaking, stepped through. He didn't look at Elias. He walked straight to Martha and placed her in handcuffs. The vault is open, Martha, the commissioner said, his voice barely a whisper. The world knows. Elias didn't stay to watch them drag his enemies away. He turned to Zora, who was leaning against the shattered monitor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her shoulder. They weren't billionaires anymore. They had no mansion to return to. They had nothing but each other and the truth. It's over, Zora, Elias whispered. The curse is gone. Zora pulled back, her eyes searching his face. She reached into the pocket of her sunburst dress, the real one she was wearing, and pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. It was the same one Elias had seen before, but it wasn't the baby photo. It was a picture of a young girl sitting on the steps of the Thorne mansion, holding the silver locket. She looked exactly like the woman who had spoken over the intercom. Elias, Zora said, her voice trembling. The voice on the intercom. It wasn't a recording, and it wasn't the girl in this photo. Elias frowned, looking at the empty record room. Then who was it? Zora pointed to the tiny, flickering red light on the server rack Elias had just wiped. The data wipe was complete, but a single encrypted file was still uploading. It was addressed to an orphanage in a small town Elias had never heard of. Attached to the file was a message. The third child was never a secret to those who loved her. She's been watching us from the beginning. Elias looked out the window at the crowd of reporters below. Far in the back, standing under a single street lamp, was a woman in a dark coat. She wasn't holding a camera. She was holding a silver locket, identical to his mother's, and she was looking directly up at him. As Elias reached for Zora's hand, his phone vibrated one last time. It wasn't a notification. It was a voice memo from his mother, recorded 30 years ago, on the day of the swap. Elias, if you are hearing this, the money is gone and you are finally free. But remember, blood isn't just about who birthed you. It's about who stays when the fire starts. Go to the docks. Find the woman with the yellow scarf. She has the last piece of your father's heart. Elias looked at Zora, a new question burning in his eyes. If the billions were gone, What was the last piece his father had left behind? And why was the woman under the street lamp now walking toward the police van where Caleb was being held? He realized the story didn't end with the funeral. It was just the beginning of a much deeper, darker truth. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you believe that truth always finds its way to the light, like this video and subscribe to our story. And tell me in the comments if you found out your entire life was a lie. Would you burn the world down to find the truth, or walk away with the person you love? Let us know where you're watching from. See you in the next one.